Hillsong exposed. The rise and fall of Mars Hill. There has been countless scandals of megachurch pastors, celebrity culture falling short in terms of how a ministry should function. But is this truly the norm of all pastors of megachurches? Or are we just seeing the most egregious and toxic stories amplified by the media? But in this video, we're going to look at 5 different megachurch pastors that have been able to dodge moral breakdown and seemingly thrive in ministry for decades, scandal-free. I'm going to highlight the good parts about their ministry and maybe some things that are questionable or I may personally disagree with. So who are these 5 pastors? Have they been truly above reproach? And what has set them apart from other megachurch pastors that have seemingly fell into scandal?
Ruslan.
This video, we're gonna switch it up a little bit. I'll be honest with you guys, when we're making these videos, the things that you guys are interested in, trying to take them and add some value to you scripturally, like our last video on the Hillsong Exposed docu-series, they can get draining, they can get exhausting, and I don't want it to feel like this is the norm of evangelical churches. Every church is corrupt, every celebrity pastor's bad, everybody, right? Because sometimes we could kind of make that narrative and it's unhelpful. And best believe, I believe this stuff should be exposed and needs to be addressed. I think it's healthy, especially when we as the church do it. However, I do want to make sure that we stop, pause, and maybe give some flowers to 5 pastors that have dodged all the scandals. They haven't had any scandals, as far as I know, by the grace of God, and highlight some brothers that some of these guys I've met, some of these guys I personally know, and some of them have been instrumental to my ministry, specifically with music and stuff like that. And so I want to highlight some folks. This is not an exhaustive list. There's literally hundreds of megachurches. A megachurch is defined as 2,000 or more members. So there's hundreds of megachurches where folks that are doing a good job, doing their best, they have a platform, but they live a quiet life and they're not out here doing anything wild. Okay, these are some guys that have been walking with the Lord for decades. This is not an endorsement of all their theology. This is not an endorsement of all their methodology. Okay, I'll tell you guys some areas where I might disagree with them on. Okay, but I wanted to bring you guys some faces to counter some of the stuff we're seeing in media of guys that I think have done well, are continuing to do well. Okay, so first up on the list, I consider this brother a friend, believe it or not. I know him personally. He's actually been on the channel before, and hopefully we have him on the channel again. He used to be a former NFL pro football player for the Los Angeles Rams and the San Diego Chargers. Ladies and gentlemen, number 1 on our list is my friend, Miles McPherson. He pastors the Rock Church here in San Diego. I've known Miles for a decade. He's been instrumental in helping me early on in terms of, 1, just giving me a platform and letting me perform at the Rock when I was just getting started with music. 2, with partnering on multiple songs together that we've done for some of their campaigns. So I know Miles McPherson personally. I think he's a solid dude. He wrote a book called Third Option, which in terms of racial reconciliation, I think is a great balanced book. The critique with the Miles McPherson will be, 1, the Rock is a big church. There's going to be big turnover. And another critique would be maybe, quote unquote, his messages are shallow. There's not a ton of like verse by verse teaching. That's kind of like the main critique. Is it's a seeker church, but I don't think that they're wrong or bad or doing anything crazy. I think it's just a bigger church. It's a big institution, and I just wanted to give him his flowers. Number 2, Timothy Keller. Holy smokes, that's a close-up face. Again, we're switching it up with the diversity of theology. Timothy Keller pastored a church in New York for decades. This brother leans in the reform circle. He's written amazing stuff on everything from marriage to apologetics to a lot of really good stuff. And he is theologically sound. They do verse by verse or have done verse by verse. He's written numerous books. I've been blessed by his ministry. I've never met him personally, but from everything I've heard from folks that have worked with him, from folks that have been on staff at his church, they are a solid church. And Timothy Keller has been serving the Lord for a long time, and I think he recently retired in 2017. The critique against Timothy Keller, and I don't like this critique, but here the critique would be against Timothy Keller is that he's too quote unquote woke. That will be the critique, because he's spoken up about some justice issues, some stuff with regarding racism. They would say, oh, Timothy Keller, he's too woke, but no scandals, no moral breakdowns. Again, that's what we're talking about when we're seeing Carl Lentz's and Brian Houston's. I'm I'm addressing it on that. By and large, I think Timothy Keller is solid. Another one that a lot of folks, and this next brother, I've met him personally. I've done an event with him. I'm kind of cheating with him because he technically is not a pastor anymore. He's moved on from being a local church pastor where they have more of like a network of home churches. But Francis Chan, ladies and gentlemen, Francis Chan, solid Bible teacher. His passion for the gospel is amazing. I would say sound doctrine. He has a series called Basic that goes over just kind of like the basics of all the essentials of the faith, the fear of God, all those different things. And I think he's super gifted as a communicator. His church was a massive church that then dwindled down into more of like a house planning network. And I believe they're meeting back like once a month or once every other month to equip the local home pastors. And Francis Chan is still kind of overseeing that. And so I love Francis Chan, a best-selling author. The critique on Francis Chan would be that he's too ecumenical. I think that's how you say that word, meaning that he just was on video speaking at like a Catholic gathering. He was at another conference with like Todd White and some more charismatic folks. He's recently became more charismatic. He comes kind of like the Calvinist reform side to the charismatic side. If you guys want to dive deep, watch something really interesting, maybe I should do a reaction video on this of Francis Chan sitting down with Mark Driscoll and Mark Driscoll telling him that he needs to make more money and he's, living too modest of a lifestyle. Hilarious in hindsight. Maybe I should react to that clip. Anyway, the next one is going to trigger you. It's going to trigger you. This is going to frustrate you guys. You gotta get so far. I could just see the comments in the comment section right now. The next one is going to trigger you. Okay, this man has been in ministry for decades. I've sat down and got to meet him personally. He did an incredible talk at a conference that I went to a couple years back when I was still on staff at my church, and he sat down with all the young pastors, all the young leaders, and he gave a talk, and it was actually a mind-blowing talk. He wrote a book that is the second best-selling book of all time next to the Bible. Pastor of Saddleback Church, Rick Warren, ladies and gentlemen. Rick Warren has been scandal-free, no moral breakdown, no adultery, no financial scandals, nothing like that. Matter of fact, Rick Warren is a reverse tither, which means that he reverses what he gives. He gives away 90%. I think he even kept increasing it after 90%. I mean, I guess when you got, second best-selling book of all time next to the Bible, you could do that. But he has a church called Saddleback. It is kind of one of the pioneers for the quote-unquote seeker-friendly movement. The critique with Rick Warren would be obvious. Obviously, it is an ecumenical thing. He's done stuff with, I think he's done some stuff with like the Pope, but people freaked out about that. Also, there would be some folks that say he does some eisegesis, meaning that he kind of will read a verse and use a verse to make a point that doesn't really make the point that she's trying to make. I've seen that in Purpose Driven Life, where he'll use certain translations, and so it's some of that stuff can be not good. But generally speaking, I've heard him preach with immense depth in a smaller group context setting than maybe on a Sunday morning. But by and large, man, Rick Warren has been faithful for a long time. He has been pastoring for a long time. Saddleback is one of the biggest churches in the country. They do also do a good job of getting people into small groups. And so I would encourage you guys that are like, you're skeptical about Rick Warren, listen to some of his long form interviews and his willingness to push back on some of your church doesn't know depth and maturity. Most folks in his church are in a small group. Most folks in his church are really walking through that sanctification process, even though Sunday morning experience is probably a little shallow. The last one is definitely going to trigger you guys, especially my Reformed brothers and sisters, but I got a resource for you that you could jump in. Okay, I have met this dude personally. He was super gracious. I wouldn't like call him a friend or anything like that, but he super gracious. He pastors a big church in Atlanta, and he has been faithful for decades, scandal-free, no drama, no adultery, no moral breakdown, nothing crazy. He's written multiple books, one of which I would recommend for creatives, for YouTubers, in terms of communication style, and it's a book called Deep and Wide, Andy Stanley has done ministry for decades, scandal-free, drama-free, no blemishes on his reputation. The critique, what Andy Stanley, similar thing, you could argue that some of the teaching, it could be a little like surface level, but if you read deep and wide, it'll kind of give you some more context for that. And also, he recently made some statements that honest youth pastor actually did a breakdown of one of his sermons that I would recommend you guys watch, that I think were taken the wrong way in regards to how he builds an apologetic for the New Testament and the authority of Scripture. And people don't like some of the language he uses when he's like poking at deconstruction and kind of like seemingly going along with it in the skepticism, right? And so Andy Stanley, North Point Church, big church in Atlanta, a great resource. His debate, if you really like, Andy Stanley said the Bible is not authoritative. If you really want to hear his thoughts on it, sit down and check out his debate with Jeff Durbin on the Unbelievable podcast, okay? And Jeff Durbin is super duper conservative, Calvinist, post-millennial, presuppositional. Andy Stanley and him go back and forth for an hour and a half. I would highly recommend you check that out because I actually think it was a really fruitful conversation. And I think a lot of what happens with specifically arguing against Andy Stanley is kind of straw manning. Like if you hear him and understand his points, understand his methodology, I think he does a great job. Now, his view of church, and a lot of these guys view church, but specifically Andy Stanley, his view of church a lot of times is more so geared towards the non-believer and trying to reach people far from God, and not necessarily for the local ecclesia gathering of believers who come together to do the sacraments like communion and worship, corporate worship, so on and so forth. So they'll kind of always tip the scales to the person far from God, and they kind of see the Sunday morning experience as primarily that. And that's kind of like most megachurch pastors are going to do that, right? So anyway, again, this is not an exhaustive list. Number two, this is not an endorsement of all their theology, all their methodologies, everything they've ever said in a book, okay? There's tons of other pastors out there. I think of, you could put a Dr. James White in there, who's a Calvinist. You could put Dr. Eric Mason in there. There's tons of guys. You could put my friend Dr. Michael Brown in there, who's technically not a local church pastor, but he's been serving the Lord for 50 years, scandal-free. There's a ton of folks that have been serving Jesus faithfully, no scandals, no drama, no moral breakdown, no corruption at their church, and doing a good job, more or less. And so those are my thoughts, man. Let me know what you guys think about this, all right? And okay, actually, you know what? Don't go in the comments and get toxic. Please don't do that. Don't you know what? Just don't let me know what you think about it. It's okay.
Kingstream Entertainment. Ruslan.
Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. Be sure to check out some of the links in the description, including a free How to Study the Bible course and a free course I put together with my Christian therapist named Dr. Rudy called Master My Habits. You guys can check that there in the description. All right? Peace.